Stage, and thank you for joining us.
Hi, everyone. I totally recognize that I'm standing in the way of happy hour. So I'm going to go through this quickly and efficiently. Show of hands, who's in compliance in the room? Who's left in the room? Oh, good. Okay, so this will be hopefully relevant to most of you. Happy to be here to speak. I was at this conference last year and was blown away, and so happy that I could attend and actually be a speaker. I see RJ's in the back. He kind of has gotten me into the swing of things and realizing the importance of cybersecurity and compliance, and especially as it relates to AML. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Hopefully you learned something new today from a compliance perspective. Let me see how this clicker thing works. I picked it. So, cybersecurity is not just for techies anymore, it's really for everybody in the room, including compliance people. Why is that? So we have this global digital transformation. We are seeing everything change right in front of our eyes. It's happening really fast, and it's good for business. It's streamlining processes, it's streamlining efficiencies, it's even enhancing customer experiences, depending on who you are, and it's really good. It's going towards progress and innovation, but with all the new technology, there are obviously risks that we need to be considering, and it's also a point where the criminals are also evolving and changing and moving in a rapid pace in the same way that we are too. So it's a problem, and it's why everybody needs to kind of think about it. The evolving threat landscape. So the criminals, they're sophisticated, they're fancy, they are doing ransomware and data breaches, and we heard a lot about ransomware today, and we're gonna keep talking about ransomware. And this is hitting our companies, it's hitting our governments, it's hitting their pockets, and it's hitting their reputations. We see the rise of state-sponsored cyber attacks. We heard John earlier this morning talk about the Lazarus Group. This is North Koreans. We also see organized cybercrime gangs. What I find very fascinating about this is they're very organized. They have businesses, they have cubicles, they have offices, marketing departments, maybe even customer service agents. They probably do a little bit of team building exercises. But seriously, if you read in on some of these organizations and these gangs, especially in Southeast Asia, it's very organized. They're better organized than our regulated companies right here on island. And you have to kind of take a minute to let that resonate. These are the criminals that we're trying to fight against, and they're more organized than we are. Like that's sobering when you think about it. Then we have regulatory pressure. And so for all my compliance folks in here, we're talking the same language. We have SEMA, we have the ombudsman, we have John, maybe, if we report things, because he already told us that we're not reporting things, but we have regulatory pressures where we know we have to do certain things and we maybe not be doing it, and we have to stay abreast with what's going on. Data Protection Act, if you are a business that operates in multiple jurisdictions, you have to think about other jurisdictional ramifications, GDPR. So these are all things that we have to kind of understand that it's affecting more than just our IT folks in a business, right? Data protection and privacy, like I just said, the DPA. And then we think about the different sectors. And some sectors don't have full-on IT cybersecurity teams, they outsource it. But the financial services obviously is a big deal here in the Cayman Islands. It's our largest pillar. It's what keeps our jurisdiction going strong. And the stakes are quite high for the financial services industry. It's a lot of data and information of a lot of rich people and how much assets they own, don't own, owe, and all of that information is right here on these shores. You think about the healthcare service, it impacts patient care, safety, privacy. We have medical tourism here, hospitality, lots and lots of information at the hotel. I don't know if Gary talked about, I know he talked about the Ds, and I'm not a technical person, I'm a compliance person. But you see in the hotels all this fancy technology, you know, the wristbands to open the door and everything. All of that stuff it's more than just IT people's problems. It's all of our problems. If we're the consumer, if we're the employee at the place, like, it's a problem and that we all need to be aware of it. So it's not just a techie thing anymore. And that's the point I'm trying to drive home. And apparently, we need to be guarding our paradise from cyber threats. So we have these different rising threats, and it's a regional issue. And a lot of folks in the room, you guys are based here in Cayman, and we have a lot of speakers visiting from abroad. But to bring it home regionally, when we think about what's happening, I got some stats yesterday from John Watson. In 2022, we had ransomware attacks that were reported. Remember, he says nobody reports them. Over 2,800 attacks in 2022. In 2023, over 5,300. This year, year to date, we're at 4,600 with almost 500 reports in this month alone. So we all know that it's happening. And that's just who decided to report, right? So it's definitely something that's happening right here on our shores, in the Caribbean region, and regional experts note that there is a lack of mandatory breach notifications for transparency and obligations for the different countries within our region to report these incidences. Luckily enough, and we'll talk a little bit more later on in some of the slides, we do have reporting obligations, it's just that we're not doing it. It's unfortunate. The financial sector vulnerabilities, and this is where I think it's really important. So this is a key pillar of the Cayman Islands. Anybody familiar with the FRA, the Financial Reporting Authority? Okay, so the compliance folks. So the Financial Reporting Authority would be equivalent to FinTrack in Canada or FinCEN in the States. This is when you see something suspicious, unusual, you report it to these authorities, right? So the FRA in 2023, they just issued their 2023 annual report. Business email compromise, which we heard a lot about earlier today, based on the number of SARs received in 2023, $3.3 million was lost, right here in Cayman, of the people that actually reported, because we know that people are not reporting, right? And they were able to stop a further $2.8 million of money going out, just from fraudulent emails. In 2022, 472,000. 472,000 to 3.3 million. What will this year look like? So it's not a decreasing problem. And again, this is just people that have reported, right? The FRA has confirmed that Cayman Islands funds, which we crossed the threshold of 30,000 registered funds here in these beautiful islands, which is a huge achievement. But we know that there are Cayman registered domicile funds that are invested in companies that have experienced ransomware attacks. So think about this from a compliance perspective, if you work in the funds industry, and how it's all going to start to be interconnected, and you can see how that's going to affect maybe some of our clients, some of our service providers, yourself included. We touched a little bit on the regulatory landscape. I know Vlad talked about this earlier with the rule on the rule in SOG on cybersecurity, the Cayman Islands Ombudsman, which is the regulator for the Data Protection Act. And regionally, we see that Caribbean islands are kind of getting up to speed and starting to implement and update their data protection acts. So we know that it's not that we're ignoring it. I wonder to myself sometimes, are we not moving fast enough? Because the technology and the pace of the criminals are rapid, and we're just kind of like lagging behind, right? With the combination of industry and governments to kind of come together to move this process along. Healthcare and hospitality in the region. Personally, I've had my data leaked right here from a healthcare provider in the Cayman Islands. And then I emailed her and I was like, hey, we can help you with cybersecurity. No response. And I emailed again, hey, by the way, no response. And it's like, did you report it? Probably not. And the legislation covers all the various sectors. So even though they're not a CIMA regulated entity, they do have an obligation to report. I didn't really see it on the Ombudsman's website, but this is the kind of atmosphere that we're in. It's like the reputation of being on a small island. Nobody wants to be the one that reports it to be on Morrow Road, but it's not really helping it's not really helping anybody else, right? I wanted to touch a little bit on not just healthcare and hospitality, but I got some stats from John yesterday. So technology companies, manufacturing companies, healthcare, and construction companies, all at around 11, 12% of the population that are reporting ransomware. The public sector, 7%. And then financial services, guess, 6%. Does that make sense? Only 6% of ransomware attacks that have been reported to the police are coming from the financial services. That's crazy. That's not true at all. That's a lie because they're not reporting it. That's the point I'm trying to get across. We have to report it because you can't be helped if you don't report it. We'll talk about awareness and preparedness and how we can bring this all together in terms of how we protect the Cayman Islands in the jurisdiction. And government initiatives will play a big role in that. We have Ms. Pam Green in the room. She's lovely. It's these public-private partnerships that I think need to be developed on island. And it's something that we recognize is important. And we also recognize in the industry that government plays a role in this. And we have to figure out how that will look in the future. We know that there's a National Security Council, and it can include cybersecurity measures that may affect the national security of our island and jurisdiction of the islands. We have the police and John Watson. They are doing a lot with training and awareness. John is everywhere trying to get the word out, report. They have a website, if you're not familiar with it, CyberSafe. Like, this website is not just for businesses, it's for kids. Kids are being targeted online with cybersecurity issues. Don't get me started on sextortion scams and pig butchering. The elderly are being targeted, so it's not just small businesses and regulated entities. This is a wider problem, and it's a societal problem, right? And to my knowledge, I don't think that we have any type of cybersecurity association on island. And I think that's the point, is that we probably need to figure out how do we come together as a jurisdiction and industry to get something going like that, because you can see the benefits of how this will play out long-term for the island and the jurisdiction, especially when I start talking about AML, because that's my thing. So we'll talk a little bit about governance and board responsibilities. I won't go into it too long because I know Vlad talked about that. The big thing is that the buck really stops with the board. It's a big job with big responsibilities. So when you're the board, you need to understand what you're doing, and you have a role in cybersecurity, and it's not an excuse to say I'm not an IT person. When you're on the board, anybody on the board in here? Ooh, so when you're on the board, you have the financial and fiduciary obligation and duties to protect the organization's assets, and that includes data and IT infrastructure. You kind of have to know what's going on with it. It's not just knowing about the P&L, and now, because you were forced to, knowing about AML. You got to know about other stuff too, right? Board members need to be informed on cybersecurity risks. They need to have regular briefings and training, and it's excellent to see that there are board members here in this room that are a part of a conference like this. There should be way more. Like, this is the type of forum and the type of event that board members should be attending, so they really understand the risks that they're facing for the organizations that they govern. Setting the tone at the top, so boards, in the same way that you would set the tone for AML and compliance, you should be setting the tone for compliance with cybersecurity in the exact same way. Incident response and crisis management. I think that board members, it's not go sort it out and figure it out. The board needs to be involved and understand what's happening in the process, because again, the buck stops with the board, not the IT guy, not the cyber guy. So they need to understand, and they are essentially calling the shots, and most times signing that paper to whoever it is, right? I wanted to point out, just before, board's role and responsibilities. What we see in some larger organizations, and I used to work for a large international bank, so you would have a subcommittee that was just for cybersecurity. So in the same way you have a compliance audit subcommittee, you'd have a cybersecurity subcommittee. And what I see now, and what I expect to see in the future, is all boards are made up of accountants and lawyers because they think that they're the smartest people, right? But you also need an IT person on a board. And you're starting to see that shift where boards are becoming more diversified, because how can you collectively as a board be able to govern and understand the risk if everybody's a lawyer or everybody's an accountant? So in the same way that you're starting to see compliance and AML professionals on boards of financial institutions, You're starting to see subcommittees for cybersecurity if you're in a mid-sized, larger institution, and you're starting to see IT professionals sitting on boards. That's invaluable. It's so important because you need to have that mix, because when these problems arise, you need to see it from all different perspectives, and you need to have that experience on your board. I have a client right now, is that they're a bank, we did an audit for them. They have issues. I picked up the phone, I called the chairman, I'm speaking in Greek because I don't know anything about IT and cybersecurity. He doesn't know anything about IT and security, but I know he has a problem. And they had a board member that was an IT manager. And I was like, wow, like that's smart. And he was able to, yes, this is what we need to do, this, and he explained everything, what happened, he understood what the process was, what he needed to fix, and it was like, yeah, that's the way of boards now. Investing in cybersecurity, it sucks because everybody's paying money for AML at the moment, but you might want to think about how and what you spend on cybersecurity and being able to balance that. And compliance and reporting. So the board needs to understand that you have certain timelines of which you need to report any type of breaches. So a lot of times the boards are relying on senior management to make sure that that's happening. But you better know that your senior management is doing it, and what mechanism do you have in place that you know senior management is reporting to the ombudsman within 5 calendar days, or if they're reporting to SEMA within the 72-hour time frame. Like that you have to have something in place where you're holding people accountable as a board. Okay, so hold up, give me a minute, audits and reg. The title of my, I'll tell you quickly, the title of this talk was supposed to be, oh boy, give me a minute on that. And I was like, we can't say, oh boy, that's not politically correct. So I had to take it out. So it's just, give me a minute on this. So we'll talk a little bit about audits and the regulatory framework. And I already talked about the regulatory framework with SEMA's rule and SOG on cybersecurity. And within that rule, they talk about the different standards that are acceptable, including the NIST standards. So most people on this island would be using the NIST standards as it relates to their cybersecurity programs, which is good. Then that's the standard I'm more familiar with, and the people that we work with are under the NIST standard. So the different types of audits, you can have an internal audit, which if you're a larger organization, you'll have a third line of defense that will operate that or outsource that, or you can have a full-on external third-party independent audit of your cybersecurity framework. Either or will work for the purposes of the regulator. Some people, if you are a much larger organization, you might want to get those experts in, like RJ, who would love to come in and do your audit because that's his thing. And that's really going to help you identify any issues before a regulator does or before you're on the news. Preparing for an audit and or inspection, we do know that SEMA is looking at cybersecurity programs as a part of their prudential inspections for regulated entities, and they did a cybersecurity thematic review on some licensees that they have inspected. So we know that that's a possibility. So in preparing for those audits and or inspection, I think what I always tell people is self-identify any issues. You should have an idea of what's wrong, what's not wrong. Be upfront. Let your auditor know, this is what we know is wrong. No, we don't have a plan. Yes, we have a plan, and this is the plan, whatever the case may be. I think it's really important to have your documentation, if you have any, very organized. It helps an audit to go smooth in any type of audit, but especially in a cybersecurity audit. The auditors will love you. The next point is to designate a key person. This is what I always find challenging as an auditor, because sometimes that key person doesn't understand what's happening. So if you're in an AML audit, you would designate somebody that understands AML. If you're in a cybersecurity audit, you can't be the AML person. Like, you need to be the cybersecurity person that can answer the questions properly and can work with compliance or whoever that person is internally, so that the flow of information goes smoothly. And just be upfront and transparent. If you know there's a problem, or if there's information that you can't provide because you don't have it, just like you don't have it, let's not beat around the bush. So those are some tips about preparing for the audit. The type of audit findings that we see and that SEMA has seen is in terms of findings in their thematic review: control weaknesses, documentation not being there or not being aligned to the NIST standards and or to the rules and SOG on cybersecurity. I've seen challenges where access control is an issue. Password settings, I know people talked about that, not being changed frequently enough. When people leave an organization, they still have access to systems, or people change a role within an organization, so they sit in a different group, so they should have limited access, but they still have access to everything. Those are the type of things that you'll see as a common finding. Documented and tested incident response plans. So people think they have a response plan. It may or may not be adequately documented, and even if it is documented, they never tested it, so they actually don't know if it even works. So you can have something documented. Is it robust enough based on your nature, size, and complexity? And did you test it? Did you do like a trial run? Did you do a roundtable exercise? Training, insufficient employee training. I love the annual trainings where you click through and it doesn't make any sense. You just click, 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 and you get the certificate that said it took 45.5 seconds. And you're like, okay, I learned about cybersecurity. Is that really adequate? And sometimes when I see these audit findings, I'm like, and people like question it, but we had the training. And I'm like, yeah, but it wasn't that good. If I asked a person in the room about what the rules were, or how many characters for their password, like they are unable to tell you anything. So sometimes the training is not robust enough. You can't evidence that the employee understood or can take anything from it. And so those are the type of findings that we see. I wanted to talk a little bit about the role of compliance in audits, because compliance is second line, and you have some compliance professionals that will say, well, I don't have anything to do with third line audits, or I don't have anything to do with cybersecurity, I'm just AML. And then you have some people in organizations that feel compliance should be involved in everything, and it's a fine line. It is a fine line. My personal stance is, I think compliance should be in the room. We might not necessarily lead and charge the way, but compliance really are the influencers in the organization as second line. We're the glue that keeps everything going. So we need to know what's going on, pretty much. We might not need to be in control of everything and in charge of everything, but we need to understand if there is a problem. Don't tell me about the problem 6 months later, because I can't help you then. And then I'm going to lose sleep, and I'm going to have to be working late, and it's a problem. Just tell me up front, keep me in the room when things are happening and decisions are being made, so I can raise my hand and say, hey, this is a challenge. Think about this before you move forward. So in the case of an audit and in anything, I would always tell people, keep compliance up front in the process, because if you find a breakdown in the audit, or you're self-identifying an issue and compliance doesn't know, like compliance can remedy that for you or support you in remedying that, lead you in the right direction, especially if it has to do with regs and the rule in the SOG. That's our thing. So just let us know up front so we can help you before the auditors come or before the inspection comes, because they're going to run the inspection anyway. So keep us in the loop so we understand if there's an issue. And the main message here is, compliance and IT, yeah, they're separate departments, but they really should be best friends. Like, they really should be best friends, because they will help each other and help the organization as a whole. We talked about regulatory reporting requirements. So the fun part now, we're going to talk a little bit about ransomware. They said I have 26 minutes. So ransomware, I think everybody understands what ransomware is. We heard a lot about it earlier. John had a really good example. The phishing emails, they're good. There are no typos in it like 5 years ago. They use ChatGPT and they say, hey, make it sound funny, make it sound clever, make it be perfect. They're really good. And so these are some of the things that we need to be aware of, right? What I learned in preparing for this, did you know they have ransomware as a service? That's wild. Did you know you can be a ready-made criminal for $5.99? That is crazy. You literally can just click on a button and they'll give you all the tools to deploy ransomware, and I can be a criminal just like that. That's crazy. And so these are the type of things that we as businesses and in the financial industry, this is what we're facing, right? So it's not just like the big bad criminals. You have all the rookie nickel and dime criminals too, right? So you're being attacked every which way. Now, my challenge with ransomware, when you pay this money to these people, who are they? We already know that the predicate offense is money laundering. But you're paying it to Lazarus. And John said that is North Korea. That's proliferation financing. Did y'all hear me? That's crazy. We just got off the gray list, y'all. Think about that. Think about that. Terrorist financing. So when you pay that Bitcoin that's supposedly traceable on Chainalysis, I don't understand that. And that's okay. I'm going to figure it out. But I ask questions and I ask questions. I'm like, well, if it is traceable, I don't understand why we don't get the Bitcoin back. And that might be way too technical for my little brain to understand. But I do understand that when you send money to a terrorist or to North Korea, that's a breach. And I do understand that we're coming up to the 5th round of the FATF mutual evaluations. And I do understand that I would not like to see the Cayman Islands back on the gray list, because that's my bread and butter and pretty much everybody's bread and butter in here. So when I think about how cybersecurity ties into AML, I'm like, I don't think other people understand that. And I had that light bulb moment last year when I was at this conference. I was like, but where's that money going? And people need their data, so they pay their ransom. And when you're paying your ransom, do you tell anybody? Did you report it to the FRA? Did you file a CRF, compliance reporting form for those that are not compliant in here? Are you the MLRO? When you paid that money, how does that work with transaction monitoring? Like, these are questions I'm throwing out because I'm so thankful to God that I've never been in a company that paid ransomware, because I don't know how I would handle it as an MLRO. Because you really don't know where you're sending the money. So you send that money because you need your data, but then what do? You file a SAR, and then what do you say? And do you report it to the police? And we already established that we're not reporting it to the police, remember. And we know that people are not reporting it to the ombudsman, and we know that people are not reporting it to SEMA. Nobody's reporting it because we hear about it and we know it's being paid, and it's just not happening. So are we really funding terrorist financing and proliferation financing? I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there to think about. And if you are an MLRO or compliance in this room, how do you manage that? I don't know, just throwing it out there. Which is why I think it's important to have these public-private partnerships and industry associations. Like, we need to be talking about this stuff. I don't know who's talking about it. Because when I talk about it in little circles, people are like, oh. I'm like, you didn't think about that? But surely other people are thinking about it, but are we coming together to talk about it, and how are we going to solve that? Preventative measures for the technologically inclined people, they say that that system updates and patches. I know about system updates. I don't know what the patch thing means, but I know that if you are working in a corporation and you don't see any kind of updates on your computer in 6 months, you need to ask a question. Hi, IT, I haven't seen any updates, because I get updates like every month. All kinds of stuff happen, and I'm like, oh, they must be doing something good. So I'm getting the updates and I'm happy, right? So those are the type of things, the employee training. And it's not just the click, click, click. Like, the training has to be meaningful, useful, because the stakes are really high in our industry. So while we're ticking the box to say we're delivering employee training, is it useful so that employees really understand, like seriously understand what's happening? And they don't have to be experts at it. Like, they should be sensible enough to say, oh, wow, like, I need to not click on this, and this is what people are doing in the background. And again, Ms. Pam, collaboration and information sharing. We have to figure out a way as a jurisdiction to come together, create an association. We have an association for everything else. I don't understand why we don't have an association for this. And if it's something that needs to be piggybacked under the compliance association, which I've already thrown out there, because I can see how we are interconnected. So we'll talk a little bit about a couple of cases that happen. The Colonial Pipeline case, I'm sure everybody's familiar with it. All the gas in the East Coast in the States, the infrastructure got hacked. People couldn't get gas. Everything was shut down. Like, that's crazy. That's infrastructure. Imagine if that happened here in the Cayman Islands. That's wild. Ransomware. And from the dark side group, they say they're Russians. WannaCry cyber attack. This was the Lazarus North Koreans. Shut down the UK's healthcare system. That's wild. Shipping company shut down for weeks. Terminals and ports, everything gets shipped into this island. The other day they said there was a strike from some shipping company and everybody went out and panic shopped. I mean, at least we could have prepared for that. We had like a couple days, but a ransomware attack, you would just be like, oh, right? And a little bit closer to home, ransomware reports reveal CARICOM-wide attacks. So Trinidad is in the lead with the most number of attacks. There was a report in 2023 by Ransomware Roundhouse, 32 known breaches amongst the nation. So this like government infrastructures. Barbados Revenue Authority files listed for sale. Did y'all know that the government of Martinique was shut down? That is wild. Caribbean faced 144 million cyber attack attempts in 6 months. Like, I hope that it's not to scare people, but like it's happening, and I just don't want us to have our head in the sand to think that it's not happening and it's not affecting us in the Cayman Islands because we live in a bubble. And trust me, I believe that we do live in a bubble, but like, this bubble can be popped, right? And this one is as recent as 2 months ago. The insurance company. And this one, I'm waiting to hear more about it because it's still so new, but ICWI was attacked, hot off the press. They stole a bunch of sensitive information, personal details of the chairman and CEO, the president, employee records, financial records. So even the insurance companies are being attacked. So it's fair game for everybody. John mentioned that there was an attempted attack to the Cayman Islands government earlier this year. Thankfully, that was thwarted. Very good. Bermuda was under attack last year. The whole government infrastructure was attacked. Bermuda government was shut down for a good while. It took them months to get back up and running fully. I mean, it's not far-fetched that something like this could happen even closer to home or right here. So with that being said, when we bring it back to, we know what can happen, and now we are, as compliance professionals in the boardroom, trying to convince and influence our boards of what they need to be concerned with. I'll talk a little bit about some things that you could be helpful in when you're trying to explain to your boards, especially boards that are, how do I put it, like professional board directors that sit on funds or sit on smaller regulated entities and they're not a part of a larger organization. Sometimes it's just, you know, dollars and cents, and these are the accountants and the lawyer boards, and nothing's wrong with that. I work a lot with them, but this is to, how do you get them to understand and see the risk here and how it implicates the sector and the industry within these islands. So effective board reporting. It's important that you're clear and concise, obviously, but we have to take out the tech language so that they can understand and I can understand too as compliance, right? I also think that it's important that compliance kind of helps CISOs break it down. And that's where I see more of a partnership with compliance and IT and cybersecurity. Instead of a board receiving individual reports from every Tom, Dick, and Harry, I really believe that compliance is the glue, and they kind of add in a touch of everything. He's smiling. Do you think that too? We're the police officers in the entity. I get it, and we're not liked as compliance professionals. Most people hate us, except in the banks. I see your face. It depends on your industry. I'm compliance too, and they always hated me. But what I think is when compliance has an eye on certain things, especially in cybersecurity, I used to look at the other reports and be like, why don't we do it this way? We can come together. See? He knows what I'm saying, because he's looking at the compliance report and its risk, and he's looking at the cybersecurity report and its risk, and they're two separate reports, and they look different, they talk different, and he's like, what the hell, but this is all risk. And because compliance is siloed and IT is siloed, they're not coming together. And this is, again, where I think that there's an intersection that needs to come together. And that's how you tell a better story, because it's all risk. It's all risk. and the risks are becoming more and more similar and merging into each other, and we're still separated. He seems happy. So I think that those reporting, it's good to collaborate. And I know that that's not a school of thought in our industry, but it's something to consider, because compliance already has the air of the director, and now you can come together, and compliance is the influencer, whether we like it or not, and they can tell the story a little bit better than the IT guy. Not that the IT guy can't tell the story, but when they come together, they can tell a more compelling story so that that director understands the real risk and how to allocate resources, and then how to show them the metrics and the indicators and list the number of incidents and what the incidents were and what the risk is and how many of those incidents could also touch on AML, and then you can see how it all comes together as a risk report and not necessarily a cyber IT report versus a compliance AML report. So the role of compliance and the strategic alignment, I just explained that. Building a cyber aware culture, it's still like from the top down type of approach. So everybody needs to think in the same way that we had this big wave of AML compliance, the same thing needs to happen for cybersecurity, because I don't think that that's really the general consensus in firms. It's kind of like IT will sort us. We don't need to worry about that. Oh yeah, oops, I clicked on that. But there needs to be more awareness on that. Resource allocation. I wanted to talk about board engagement. If you have a board as a compliance professional or a cybersecurity professional that you're reporting to and your board don't ask no questions, that's a problem. So, and if they're not asking questions, you should be asking them questions. What do you think about that? Because that's how you know if they understand or they're just glazed over and they really don't even understand and they're just kind of like waiting for you to finish and move on to the next thing that they do understand. So you need to engage with your board in a way that you're having a conversation about the risk and putting it all together. So give me a minute to talk about how we learn, developing training programs. So I talked about the typical tick box training programs. And there was a question earlier in the audience, I think while Vlad was talking about training for boards and stuff. I think that nowadays these online training, and I work for Ogier and we provide online training. Nothing beats in-person training. I think there's a place for online training, but for boards, I think there needs to be that interaction. People are very busy, they think they're multitasking and they're not, and they're just not getting the content and they're not understanding it. So you need to develop programs for most people. It's not a one size fits all, it's a one size fits most. And then you need to have options for the other people that don't fit into that most, right? Right. So, and I think training, in my mind, they talk about annual training. If the criminals are changing on a weekly basis, I don't understand how annual training is going to support your staff. Help me understand. I like this director in the front here, because it doesn't make sense. So everything is happening. So instead of rolling out a big fancy click through the box training, answer these multiple choice questions once a year and toss it away and forget about it, I think that training generally needs to be reimagined, redeveloped. I think there's ways where it needs to be more interactive. Speaking of which, phishing simulation. So when I worked at a bank, they would have random fake emails sent out to people in different departments to test you. And it was good, because then your name got listed on a leaderboard if you clicked on it or didn't click on it. And every time you clicked when you weren't supposed to click, you would pop up on management's report. And that was an opportunity to train you, identify that you weren't understanding, right? It was an opportunity to highlight, especially depending on what department you were working in. Like if you were working in wires where money is going out and you keep clicking, maybe that's not the job for you. But this is the kind of data and training that can lead to operational efficiencies and save you money. These are the type of data and information that should show up in a board report to your board to say, you know what, this department, they need more training because they keep clicking. And you work at a bank and they're click, 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 and they're sending the money out. And that actually does happen, because we've heard many stories where people in finance departments are sending out the money from fake emails, business email compromise, so they're not able to spot and identify it. So the annual training, as you can see, wouldn't really work, right? So the people that have access to money, bank accounts, they should be getting more specialized training to really understand, maybe more frequent training. So you need to be developing training programs, make it interactive, have a leaderboard. Again, creating that culture of cybersecurity awareness. I think measuring effectiveness is important. So again, in my experience, we used to get a report of all of our staff, and we could see how they were developing in their training. So we would know, okay, they've reached the max. They no longer are clicking on the fake emails. They're good. They finally learned. That kind of way. And creating that culture, we also used to have things all over the office, in the break room, you know, watch out for fake emails, look at this. So it becomes in the same way when you think about all the things that we did for AML, we have to do the same thing for cybersecurity. Having a champion, a cybersecurity champion, encouraging reporting. So like if you did click on something and made a mistake, are you too afraid to raise your hand to say, crap, I clicked on something and made a mistake? Because if you are in an office environment where you can't make a mistake, that's also a challenge and it can cost your company. I won't talk too much about incident responses, but I want to talk about third-party risks. So small businesses, you can't afford to have a full-on cybersecurity IT team. You outsource it, but you're still responsible if something goes wrong. So how do you manage those third-party risks? And this is where compliance becomes very important, because they typically are part of that process for vendor due diligence, making sure that they are who they say they are. They're going to do what they say they're going to do. Their SLA is right. It makes sense. How do we test that? How do we know that they're going to live up to their bargain of the agreement? Monitoring them. Do they do audits? Can I audit them? Can I see what they're doing? And if there is an incident, are they going to reply to me? In what time are they going to reply to me? Is it going to be quick? Am I going to get the information I need? Do they do backups? How do I know that? Do they got a report? When was their last audit? Ask them 101 questions, because you're paying them good money to do it. So we know that the nature of the industry here on island, with a lot of the small and mid-sized firms, they have to outsource it. And we have some fantastic outsourcing providers here in this room and on island. But you got to make sure you're holding them accountable. Ask them the tough questions. You should be getting reports. They should be reporting to the board. And the board can ask for that, and they should be asking for that, because the board, the buck stops with them, and they're ultimately accountable if they mess up or screw up something as the third-party outsource provider. And again, you see this general theme this time? Collaboration and information sharing. So all these things, if you're having a problem with your vendor, it's a small island. If we had an association, let's nip that in the bud. This vendor ain't doing what they're supposed to be doing. I had an incident and they couldn't come through. Now you know. That vendor gets better. We're holding people accountable. This builds the whole jurisdiction reputation, if you see what I mean, bigger picture. Home stretch, 6 minutes to go. This part, what we're looking forward in the future threats. Now, I had a nice talk with a gentleman at lunch named Angus. He's from Washington, D.C. He's going to be talking remotely on AI attacks at some conference in Vietnam. I have a personal issue with these deep fakes. So I work in AML compliance, and I was all gung-ho about, SEMA updated the AML guidance notes, and we can have EKYC. Yeah, we're going to do this EKYC assessment. I'm ready for it. And then I see deep fakes, where a person thinks they're talking to their mother on their phone, and it's not their mother. It's the Yahoo boys in Nigeria. But it's real, and I've seen it with my own two eyes, and I'm like, oh my God, I don't know how we're going to get around it. I don't know what the solution is, but the deepfakes are serious. And I wouldn't believe it unless I didn't see it for myself. So now you have, if you think about a compliance person collecting KYC to open a bank account, and we all know what it is to open up a bank account here, and you're relying on, I'm going to use a video conferencing, which the guidance notes allows for, but of course you have to do a risk assessment on the technology that you're using. How can you trust anything with deepfake AI now? That blows my mind. I don't even know what the answer is to that. And that's why I have to stay friends with the cybersecurity professionals in this room, because we have to stay aware of what's happening, because this is changing so quickly. You have people that are able to sound just like you. They're using technology, so it sounds just like Georgia Scott. And they're calling my mom and telling her I'm in trouble and she needs money. The pig butchering scams, the sextortion scams with kids, all through AI deepfakes is wild. How do we manage that as compliance? How do we manage that with the cybersecurity threats? I don't know the answer to that, but these are the type of things that we have to think about going forward as we protect our industry and our jurisdiction. The Internet of Things, Gary talked about that. I won't talk too much. All I will say is I don't have any of those things in my house because I'm afraid of it. I don't have Cirrus, Alexa. I'm an old lady. I don't have an iPhone because I'm actually afraid of it. I don't have a Ring doorbell. I have small children, and I've seen enough crazy stuff on the internet where I'm just like, no, I can't even deal. But eventually, I'm gonna have to deal. I don't know what the solution is, but these are the type of things that we have to think about in the future, because it's happening. It's not stopping. Cloud security challenges. Everything is in the cloud now, which is great. It's fantastic. We don't have to worry about the big server rooms and salt water getting in them. But when it's in the cloud, I don't even understand. My head can't wrap around that. Everybody's in the cloud. How do I protect everything? I don't know. And everybody's in the one cloud. I don't. But these are the type of things we have to think about. And I see the IT guys in here like, yeah, we can help you with that. But break that down to me as a compliance person and protecting data and DPA and making sure that I'm not in the news when there's a breach, because I'm pretty sure all the big breaches in all these fancy companies were in the cloud. I'm not a technical person. But break that down to me, to the general population, like it's still the cloud and there's still risks and challenges. And this is where I think that compliance and cybersecurity have to come together to understand that, right? Supply chain attacks, we talked about the shipping company. I suspect that this is something that we need to be thinking about and understanding infrastructure and supply chains. I definitely think that this is something that's going to be more prevalent in the future. And these are the type of things we have to think about. Now, this one is interesting. Quantum computing threats. When I had to look this one up, the computer is going to get so good that they're going to crack all the codes before we can figure it out. So you encrypt your data, but the computer is so fast and they're so fancy, and Gavin's looking at me and he understands, but they're going to be able to decrypt everything that we work so hard to encrypt because the computers are getting better. That's wild to me. I don't know what the solution is to that. Because we're trying to protect our client data, we're trying to protect our personal data and hospital data and all this sort of things, but the bad guys are still moving quicker. And this zero trust architecture, RJ said not to say it because nobody understands it, so I said it anyway. Zero trust architecture. It's a security model based on the principle that no entity, either inside or outside the network, is trusted by default. So you work for the company, the system doesn't trust you. You're outside of the company, the system doesn't trust you. And there's lots of layers and layers and layers and layers and layers of security and passwords and protection. And is this the way forward? I'm not sure. But these are the things that I think are gonna start to become more commonplace. We're gonna hear more about it, and we're gonna have to figure out how do we stay compliant as these new technologies and threats keep coming at us. So I think the takeaways today, and we'll recap, for me is compliance is your friend. We need to work together. Compliance and IT really should be best friends. And we need to lean on each other. I think that financial crime is bigger than most people understand and realize. And we need to talk more about that, especially from a cybersecurity perspective, and coming together to understand that these threats are not just data breaches, but it's a bigger implication. Another takeaway is the reputation of our industry and the jurisdiction is very important. It's our livelihood, it's our bread and butter. It's why most of us are on this rock. So all these things tie into that. And then the final takeaway that I want everybody to understand is collaboration. I hope I drove it home, Miss Pam. But we need to figure out a way, if we develop an association, something, we have associations for everything else. I don't know who's gonna take the lead, but we should come together, because it shouldn't be that just once a year at this forum we're talking about it. So I was at a conference 2 weeks ago. It's the Regional Compliance Association conference. So every jurisdiction has a compliance association, and they meet once a year. And everybody comes with what's happening in their country, in their island, and they come together, and all the associations stay in touch, and they connect, and it's great. We should be talking about cybersecurity. Why don't we have something similar in the region? And then in terms of what's next, we talked about a bunch of stuff. So I think what's next is for you to go back, make sure you get an audit. If you haven't, make sure your docs are organized, make sure you test your incident response plan, because it's not if, it's when. And get some decent training going on so people really understand the risk, because I don't think they understand. Like, I think the trainings are just, the tick box training is just not cutting it in my mind. Because I mean, yeah, I think those are the key takeaways, I think, of what you should do next. And those are easy wins. It shouldn't cost you too much money to be compliant. That's it. I let you out. 1 minute over. I could take a question if you want. I think you guys know how to find me, though. No questions? I tried. All right. Thank you, too. Thank you, too.